The thing about your grandmother is that she never complained that there was too much news. She would never sit down, put her head in her hands and go, I'm just flooded by news. I'm addicted to news, right? This just doesn't, just didn't happen. Whereas nowadays, many of us do say precisely that. We say we've got too much news. Probably the last thing you did last night after that was to check the news headlines. And then this morning, before that, you also checked the news headlines. So there is something about the news, which is the topic of tonight, that has become, and it's strange to use that word, but it's become strangely addictive. It used to be great, addicted to methadone and heroin and cocaine, but now, I'm sorry, I'm addicted to CNN. It doesn't sound glamorous, but it happens. We do get addicted to this thing called the news. Now, some of the problem is that we're never really trained to deal with this stuff called the news. It comes at us on multiple platforms all the time, and yet very rarely does anyone go systematically through, okay, this is what it is, it does this to you, certain after effects might be felt. When you're at school, people give a shot at telling you how to look at art. You sit down, a teacher takes you through the pictures. They might tell you about how to deal with theatre, what's really going on in plays or novels, etc. But no one ever really tells you what you're supposed to think and feel and do when you come across the news. It's really weird stuff. And yet, what's happening to us when we see this sort of stuff? We're not given very much warning. And so one day, we wake up, we look at the paper, and all sorts of odd things are happening inside. Now, it's supposed to be very good for us. I'm sorry, shall we just leave it on that one and then... Okay, so... it's supposed to be really good for us. And news organizations tell us you need to be informed, keep up with the latest events. But if I asked any of you good folk here, what happened today, last week? Any memories of what happened in the news? The news that you spend 4 or 5 hours a week, or more, or 10 hours listening? Do you remember anything that happened last week? No, you don't. And I don't either. We don't. We can't remember any of this stuff. It just washes straight through us. It's supposed to be so important, yet it leaves no trace. What on earth is going on? If it's so important, we should surely remember it in some way. And yet somehow we can't quite. When the age of news started, which is really in the 18th century, in Europe in the 18th century, people started arguing, you've got to have news, it's got to be freely available, and if you give people news, society will improve, because people will put pressure on politicians, and then there'll be no more corruption, and information is going to cleanse the stables of the state, and things will go better. It's a beautiful dream, but is it really coming true? It's almost as though nowadays, if you want to keep a population passive, worn down, confused about what to do, unsure about how the political system works, you've got two options. The first kind is well practiced in North Korea. No news at all. Just throttle the pipeline of news. Don't give people any news, right? Then they just won't know what's going on. But there's another, slyer, cleverer kind of technique, well practiced in Australia and in other parts. So much news that you can't work out what on earth is going on anymore. Flood people with news so they can't make sense anymore of anything. There's a constant overflow of news which destroys our capacity to pay attention, to follow a story, to develop and deepen our understanding, while at the same time we're constantly told, well, it's a free country, the information's all out there, you can go and read it if you like. Well, it's very hard when there's so much and the story keeps dropping and changing. Now, the German philosopher Hegel said that a society becomes modern when it gives up going to church all the time, and instead stays home and reads the newspaper. And that's very much, here it is again, very much what we've become, the sort of society that we've become. We've done away with these guys, more or less, and what's replaced it is the news. And think of the authority of the news. It's the news, and it speaks to us in a gravelly voice with grey-haired gentlemen telling us important things. And it's telling us, that's the place to go to find out how life really works, what's important, what's good or bad, the direction of our society. That is where we go. And the news is important because if you're trying to start a revolution, where do you drive your tank? Okay, you've got your tank and you want to change stuff. Do you drive your tanks to the home of the philosophers? No. Do you go to the homes of the poets or the sociologists or the anthropologists? No, of course you don't. You go straight to the news HQ. That's where you go because that is what controls the mentality of a nation. The news is the teacher of the nation. Once we do away with school and university, the news becomes the foremost voice of authority. Now, what I want to do tonight is just take you through some of the weird and troubling things that go with the news. And I want to point you in a way towards a better kind of news. We haven't cracked it all. We can do better. And one of the ways in which you can do better around the news is to work out how it works and quite what it does to us. Now, One of the areas that interests me is what the fate of serious news stories in a very distracted age. In a way, this is the most important story of our time, okay? But if you put this story on your front page, your audience will collapse, okay? No one will come and see because people don't seem to find a way of making this story very interesting. It's depressing, it's got no beginning or an end so far away, it's got no whatever. So what we really like to do, if you want to put audience figures up on your website, on your news organization, you want to make some money, use Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is fantastic. If you put her, particularly in shorts, you will get a fantastic audience response, okay? Now, this really worries serious people, particularly people in the news, serious people in the news, and they want to run for the hills. They want to go, what kind of a civilization are we living in? Where this stupid, ridiculous woman who's got no import for anything to do with mankind's future, why are we finding that this story is getting lost to this story, okay? It is a serious problem. And I think it's a problem of our times, a distinct problem of our times. The temptation is to get despairing and to blame the audience for being a bunch of idiots. I am not particularly inclined to do that because I think about the Renaissance. Now, interesting things happened in the Renaissance. The Catholic Church in the Renaissance in Europe had a really difficult and serious message to sell, okay, which is you have to start following the teachings of Jesus Christ, because if you don't, you're going to end up in hell. So you've got to be good and you've got to do it now. Now, how are they going to get this pretty arduous and weird message across? Well, they turned to artists and asked them to paint giant advertising hoardings, or as they called them, altarpieces, okay? And they tried to get the message across through making rather interesting and seductive images. Now, the Catholic Church very wisely recognized that if you've got something important to say, do not put it in the mouths or the hands of guys like this guy here. I don't know if you can see him, but he is Saint Jerome, and he's carrying a big book, and he's got a huge beard, and he looks pretty, I don't know. I mean, if you've got an important message, don't give it to guys with beards. Who look like that. It's not going to go down well. So Giovanni Bellini, classic, Venetian Renaissance artist, knew that he had to turn to the Taylor Swifts of the day to sugarcoat the message. So there they are, there's Taylor Swift, and they're doing a really good job of selling you the redemption of Christ, the message of Christ. And we go, oh, how beautiful, how pretty, and we get the message, right? Now, what's this really talking about? This is saying that the Catholic Church understood a word which highbrow people have a real problem with, popularization, okay? Sometimes people say to me, you are a popular philosopher. Now, that basically means you're an idiot. But really, the task of popularization is about the most important you can have in a democratic society where some of the most important issues need to get traction with wide varieties of people. Because if you've got an important story and you cannot popularize it, you're dead in the water, okay? And most serious news organizations are just waking up to the fact. Because when you go to journalism school, you get taught to report things accurately and to write in clear language and to go out and hunt the facts and be honest, okay? All of which is not going to tell you what you really need to do, which is to grip your audience and make something convincing. And sometimes people say, well, that's not a very interesting story. To which my response is, because you're not very talented. You've got to make it an interesting story. Of course it's an interesting story, okay? If you're a Tolstoy, you can make an interesting story out of, a particular look. Well, take Chekhov, right? Chekhov managed to make gripping short stories out of a little look that a man gave a woman in a train carriage, okay? Gripping story, right? Now, if he managed to do that, you can do something good with this, okay? But the problem is, journalists are a little bit lazy, and they go, well, it's not dramatic enough. There's just the audience is a bit bored. It's not interesting. We need this because, there's more exciting. Well, of course that's more exciting. But the thing to do is to try and find the exciting thread within the larger story. And that's a skill that news journalism has not yet learned, is just waking up to. At the moment, we're in the moaning stage, where journalists will go, it's not fair, the audience is stupid, they're not interested in the serious stories, right? And my response is, no, you've got to go out there and sell that story like the Catholics sold the redemption of Christ, more or less. Okay, now look, moving on. I said a minute ago that there's too much news, they're flooded by news. Now, the truth is actually there's not that much news. This is the real secret of news organizations. They keep telling us there's lots of news, but there isn't actually. There's actually just the same news that keeps going round and round. It's the same story, okay, but it's dressed up to look completely different. So there are archetypes in news. An archetype is, as it were, a story which keeps being repeated in slightly different guises, but in its heart, it's the same. In my book, I suggest that there are 43 news stories in the world. Only 43. Okay? But they just keep going round and round and look slightly different. But basically, it's the same thing. Now, news organizations will never tell you this because it's always got to be new, because you've got to keep buying the newspaper and going to the website and all the rest of it. So they'll never tell you that everything is completely new. It's new in the news. But that's not true. Stories keep coming around. So what we've got to do as the audience, in order not to go crazy, is get better at spotting archetypes. And that's partly what my book tries to help you to do. So look, let me give you an example of 3 stories which are actually only one story, and they're just pretending each of them to be new. This is one bit of the story. This is another bit of the story, and this is another bit of the story. Now, it looks like 3 stories about lots of different things, but actually it's the same story. Now, what is it the story of? It's the story of a very high-flown, high-born person, okay, doing something very ordinary, okay? And it has the same emotional impact. It means the same to our deeper selves, okay? And basically what it means is, oh, wow, great, that's amazing that high-flown person is doing that ordinary thing. So its emotional meaning is identical, even if the facts around it are quite different. So this is Prince William, and look, it's amazing. He's playing with he's putting his child's car seat in the car. Amazing. He's going to be the king, and he knows how to operate a car seat. Wow, it's so touching, so interesting, okay? Similarly, extraordinary thing, Taylor Swift again, and there she is. She's buying lettuce. Oh, she's gone to the supermarket. She's carrying a shopping thing. It's just amazing. And look at this. He's the son of God. He could have been born in a palace, but no, it's a simple barn. It's just amazing how, the son of God is there. It's exactly the same story. It's just being repeated in slightly different guises. So what we need to do is become spotters of archetypes. That is what being a good navigator of modern news needs you to do. To spot the essential story, the 43 essential stories that are circulating in the news machine. Get better at spotting them. Now look, something else. Let's go on to foreign news. Okay, now foreign news, world news as the Americans call it, is a category of news around which there's a lot of idealism. The feeling is that we used to be very provincial and used to only care about our own kinds of people. And then brave journalists went out with their satellites and their fiber optic cables, and they started telling us about the rest of the world. And isn't that great? Because now we can care about people who are far away from us. And that seems a huge extension of kind of human empathy and all the rest of it. The thing is, there's one really big problem, which is that last week 200 people died in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and you guys didn't notice, and nor did I. Of course we didn't notice, and we didn't notice because we don't care. And why don't we care? Well, we never even suspected these people existed. So why does it matter if they died? We don't. We can watch a story about the death of 200 people in a faraway land, and then go and make a cup of tea, and we can be asleep within 20 minutes, totally undisturbed by the death of these people. Are we monsters? Are we crazy? Are we racist? Is that why we don't care? Because they've got different colour skin? No, of course not. It all depends on how the story is told to you. Take King Lear, right? So Shakespeare tells us about King Lear, and he's a guy who lived, hundreds of years ago. In fact, he never lived. He was made up. He was made up 200 years ago. And you watch King Lear, and you start crying, and you're so sad, and King Lear and his problems, and you come home, and you can't quite sleep, and it's really grief-stricken. And, compare it with these guys, you don't care at all. So we're capable of feeling lots of things. But what's the difference between this story and King Lear? Shakespeare. Okay, now I'm not saying that Shakespeare has to join the newsrooms, though it would be nice, but we need to learn something from this, that our capacity to respond to stories depends crucially on how that story is told. Okay? If the story is told badly, we won't care. Okay? Now this is quite surprising because the whole premise of news, okay, is that news is all about facts. News organizations are fact-gathering machines, and they believe that if you go out into the world and gather facts, important facts like 400 people have just died here, or 300 people have been swept away in a landslide, etc., and you arduously go and get those facts very bravely, then you return home and you print that story, then people will care. Okay? That's not true at all. People don't care. Because people don't care about facts. They need this thing called empathy. And in order to empathize, you need lots of things. For a start, you need to know what life is like before the landslide, before the cataclysm, before the civil war. You need to know the steady state of a place before the disaster can start to touch you. But the news is not interested in the normal thing. I mean, have we ever heard a story in the news about what it's like to go to the hairdresser in Peru? No. It's very important, but no one knows what it's like to go to the hairdresser in Peru. We haven't heard anyone reporting anything about what it's like to fall in love in Sierra Leone, okay? Or what an ordinary day might be like in Bolivia or Paraguay. We don't even have any images of what life is like in Paraguay. We don't know the world. We are globalized provincials, okay? We've got these satellites and fiber optic cables, and we don't know what to do with them. Because when the information comes in, because it's merely information, merely data, and it hasn't been processed through the discipline of art, we don't know what to do with it. It doesn't touch us. It leaves us cold. Okay? It's not because we're monsters, it's because the information is not being presented to us in the right way. So news needs to learn stuff from art. Now, the art form that is closest to journalism is photojournalism. Okay, photojournalism, the art of making photographs out of news scenarios, is, well, it's fallen into really bad times. I know a lot of philosophers, and philosophers are a sad bunch, and they're always complaining that no one respects them, and they haven't got enough money, and all the rest of it. But there's no professional group as disgruntled as photojournalists. My God, those guys are gloomy. Even the photo agency Magnum is on its knees. No one is paying any more for photojournalism. Okay? No one cares anymore about great photography or interesting or good photography. And don't get me wrong, there are loads of images in the news nowadays, but if you've been in a newsroom, the news editor will say, just get me a picture of Sierra Leone, just any picture. Right? If you're a photojournalist, that's like, that's heresy, right? Any picture, they don't care. Wallpaper, and the budgets are slim, because the argument for good photography has been lost. No one knows why photography might matter, why you might need to pay for it. Well, it matters a hell of a lot, and the reason it matters so much is because it is a route to empathy. And what we need is good photography. Now, what is good photography? You could take a class on this and would last 6 weeks, and would, lots of discussions on what good photography is. Now, I'm not interested in the kind of color balance or framing or all that kind of vision of photography. What really makes a photograph good in this context is its ability to advance knowledge. The fact that it carries within it information which goes beyond what language has already told you. It's in itself an information-bearing medium. That is what makes a photograph good. And a photograph is dead, is sterile, if all it does is merely corroborate levels of information that are already stated in text. Now, this is a photograph by Stephanie Sinclair, who's a Pulitzer Prize photographer who went out to the Yemen to do a photo essay, wonderful photo essay on child marriage in the Yemen. Now, you might say, oh, child marriage, yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, that's, whatever. Thing is, once you start looking at her photographs, they're stunning, they're fascinating, they're deeply interesting. For a start, I learned lots of things. I thought it was children, little girls getting married to men. But in fact, when you look at her photographs, you realize it's not little girls. It's actually little old ladies. What they go through is so traumatic that they seem to age decades in minutes. It's absolutely poignant and heartbreaking. And the men, you imagine them as brutes, and it's all very kind of brutal and violent. But actually, they're kind of lost boys. The whole situation is a lot more poignant and subtle than you might think if you're just merely reading a description. So, great photography, an absolutely essential tool in breaking us out of our globalized provincialism. It's not just pictures from abroad or from developing nations to which this holds true. Take the US president, okay? We've seen loads of pictures of Obama that look like this. This is a dead picture. It doesn't teach you anything. There's no information in this picture which you don't know about already. This is a good photograph of President Obama. It's taken by the White House photographer Pete Sousa, who every week posts his photographs to the White House blog. And we know lots of things about Obama. We know that he's a fake in many areas, like most politicians, and he fakes things in order to get elected. What we didn't know is that he also fakes things to please a child, in this case, the child of a White House staffer, by pretending that he's being shot by Spider-Man. That's quite touching. So there's kind of new data here. It's an interesting photograph that we can spend time looking at, but news organizations are not investing in it because they don't believe in photography as an information-bearing medium, and they don't believe in art, in the discipline of art. This seems absolutely crucial to a proper appreciation of world events. Now, look, something else in the world of news. Look, you guys all seem really nice, and if we knew each other better, you just seem really lovely. And on a good day, I'm quite nice too. In fact, most people are quite nice, right, on a good day. But when you go to the news, something surprising happens. When you read a news story, particularly online, okay, you read the story, and then you go what's called below the line, and you're in for a really extraordinary surprise, okay? What you realize when you go below the line is that everybody is crazy. They're all completely crazy. They are violent, they are vindictive, they are nasty. You just think, is this possible? How can we live in this society? This is an average story I pulled off The Guardian. It's a story about George Osborne, the UK Chancellor. It is unbelievable. One guy wants to take off his socks and stuff them in his mouth, and another guy, it's disgusting. It's just unbelievable. What's going on here? Oh, are we crazy? Well, look, I don't think so. I think that these comments on the behind news stories are a little bit like keeping a journal. You know how it is when you're keeping a journal, and let's say you've had a bad day, and you go up to your bedroom, and you pull out the journal, and you go, I hate everybody. I'm going to commit suicide. I can't bear anyone. It's all gone wrong. And you're writing this down. Your tears are flowing. I'm being a little autobiographical, but you get the picture. And you're writing this thing, and then the mood passes, and you put the diary away, the journal away, and you go and rejoin group life. And it's really important that you don't tell anyone about this and that they don't know about that, because, well, they wouldn't be able to think of you in the same way again if they knew that about you. So it's very, very important. Now, look, I think that these comments are a little bit like those journal entries. They are effusions of feelings which are not fundamental to the people who do them, but they come out nevertheless in moments of private weakness. And that's why it's extremely important, because we've got to go out there in the world and love and trust and do business and get on with people. We can't afford the moral from which these comments point us to. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, I really urge you never, ever, ever to go below the line. It's information which makes it impossible to be a member of the community. So very, very important. It's a new problem. Our grandmothers never had it. Now, something else. This is a little disturbing. Now, this is a guy who was in the British Army, highly decorated, won every kind of medal going, and here he is with his 7-year-old son. And shortly after this picture was taken, this man took his 7-year-old son and his 9-year-old daughter and took them to a lay-by in Hampshire and stabbed them in his car, and then stabbed himself. And the car was found a few days later with the blood-soaked bodies by somebody walking their dog. Now, the reason I mention this story is that this story was the most visited story in the English language's most popular news outlet, the Mail Online, 2 years ago. It went off the scale in terms of visitors. People were utterly fascinated by this story of this ex-soldier murdering his children. Are we sick? What's going on? Why do we have such an appetite for this sort of story? Why is the news full of this sort of story? Are we sick? Well, look, I don't think we are. And the reason why not is, I like to go back to Aristotle in this case. Now, Aristotle, in the 4th century BC in Athens, made a fascinating observation. He observed that there is an art form which he called tragedy, where people go and sit in an auditorium and watch stories that put this one to shame in terms of levels of bloodthirstiness, okay? They'll go and see stories of incest and cannibalism and murder and eyes being gouged out and all the rest of it, okay? And they watch these stories known as tragedies, written by people like Sophocles and Euripides, and they watch these stories, and these stories do not make them into barbarians. They are, in fact, Aristotle believed, civilizing experiences, that there is something sometimes, potentially, about witnessing the horror of others that has a civilizing effect. So when you're seeing, this is Oedipus the King, Sophocles' Oedipus the King, these tragedies have a power to educate. And Aristotle thought they educate us in 2 areas in particular. They enhance our capacities for pity and fear. Pity for the tragic hero, based on an awareness of how easily all of us are always on the edge of disaster. However sane we may seem, all of us can be pushed to an extreme where we would do something so-called mad, right? Our sanity and good health is something we cannot take for granted. We're all of us on the edge of doing crazy things, sometimes. And then fear for us, fear for ourselves, because all of us are potentially exposed to horrific dangers. And the story of the tragic tales of people who've messed up, who've broken their lives, who've fundamentally destroyed everything they love, and for whom there can be no redemption. These stories are educative. They make us human and, more importantly, humane. So it's very important, if you want a humane citizenry, to look at these sort of stories and become... Well, look, I mean, think of how... The problem with the newspapers and news organizations is that they present us with this sort of information about deaths and murders, etc., but they don't tie it up. They don't do what Aristotle thought that a good tragedy always does, which is to provoke catharsis, what we might call a working through, a redemption, right? All of this needs to happen when you're exposed to these stories. But news organizations don't do that. They just put the ingredients in front of us and let us get on with it. If there was a headline in the Mail Online for this kind of story, it might be, sex with mum was blinding, something like that, a kind of aggressive, tough, cynical kind of thing. Sex with mum was blinding. So very far from the sophistication of Sophocles, very far from arousing fear and pity. And this so often happens with the news. The news takes us to the edge of a very important set of emotions and then doesn't tie them up for us, leaving us with a low level of anxiety, dissatisfaction, feeling of kind of sickness. So we're reading these stories, we're compelled by them, and yet we're not doing anything with them in the way that Aristotle and the great tragedians thought we could. So there's a real opportunity there to tie things up slightly better in the news. Another very popular category of news is car crashes. People love a good car crash, particularly on one of the main commuter lines, fog, lots of people dead. People love that, off the scale. But the thing that really, as we know in the last few weeks, people really love most of all is a good plane crash. My God, people love a good plane crash. Off the scale levels of interest, particularly if it's a wide-bodied and if the accident happens out of the blue and there are children on board, it just goes off the scale. Are we mad? What kind of people are we? What are we doing? Going again and again to the story of airliners that have crashed and cars that have crashed and dead bodies everywhere. Are we sick? No. We're looking for the meaning of life. Now, in the Middle Ages, a very standard piece of interior decoration to put on your table was a skull, either an actual skull or a painting of a skull. Right? You put this in your eyesight every day, and the reason was to keep in mind that you are mortal, that at any time death may come. And the thought of death was held to be, very wisely, an incredibly important catalyst for working out what's important in your life and what's not, to weed out the superfluous, to weed out the cruelty that we don't feel proud of, the obsessions that we don't want to be remembered by, the ways in which our lives have gone out of focus. And death is an agent of the thought of death, is an agent of refocusing. Now, I believe, we no longer put skulls on our tables. We no longer like to think about death too much, except for in one area, the news. I think the news, this was called a memento mori in those days, literally a reminder of death. I think that news has become our new memento mori. That's what this story is. That's what this story is. It's a reminder that however calm and safe and ordinary things look, any time something may happen to you. So keep that in mind. But again, the news is not helping us to know that. It's giving us a purely factual description. And today, north of Perth, a life vessel was found, and this, the 3 cars crashed. It's not doing the digestion. It's merely presenting us with the facts. And that leaves us without what Aristotle called catharsis. So we're constantly being taken to the edge of really traumatic and important material, and the ends are not tied up for us. No wonder we're left a little anxious by the news. Of course we are. Nothing's tied up. There's no catharsis. We're permanently scared. The news loves to scare us. It loves to scare us, because when you're a bit scared, you'll keep checking the news again. The news terrifies you about everything. There's swine flu and bird flu and chicken flu and UFOs and Martians and I don't know what. There's always something that is about to end humanity as we know it. The news loves to terrify us. It also loves to terrify us about human nature. And you know that about the news, because when your car breaks down on a windy, dark night and it's time to talk to a stranger, you know what's going to happen. You're going to knock at the door of an isolated farmhouse, guy's going to come out, and he's going to kill you. And then after he's going to have sex with you, then he's going to kill you, and then he's going to chop you up into very, very small pieces and either put you in the river, feed you to crocodiles, put you in the trunk of the car. And you know this because you're an assiduous watcher of the news, and you know that everybody's a murderer or pedophile or a madman, etc. Because the news is an organization that wants to permanently show us what's new and strange and different. And actually hardly anyone ever gets murdered. You'd really have to try hard to get murdered. But there are a few murders every now and then, and they always end up in the papers. And that's why when we keep reading the papers, we think that everybody's a murderer. The anomalous becomes the normal when we keep following the news. So the news likes to keep us wounded and terrified. The one thing it doesn't do is, will teach us, we'll get through it. It's okay. We'll survive those floods, those fires. Humanity will survive, as it has done so many other crises. The message of resilience is about the least likely thing you're ever going to hear from a news organization. There's one area, though, where the news is very, very optimistic, and that is around an area called health news. If you listen to the news, a lot of what it is telling us is that death is on its way out, okay? Because there's some guys at MIT or maybe Stanford, often in America, and they've got white coats, and they're about to invent something amazing, okay? Some cancer-busting drug. Or they're giving you new advice like, have some aspirin and then you won't get Alzheimer's, or eat walnuts and you won't get arthritis, or have a glass of wine for this, or no glass of wine for that, or extra chocolate, or lie down more, or lie down less. Constantly advice on how the fantasy is you're not going to die, Okay, that's really what they're going to say. Really, what every headline of that kind of news is: death been abolished. Okay, the bad news is, guys, death has not been abolished. It's not going away anytime soon. Okay, maybe we'll delay the onset of Alzheimer's a little bit by swallowing that aspirin, but basically, we're all on the way out. Now, the guys that the news replaced knew about that, and one of the things that they did, which was very nice, was to just accept that as a fact. We're all going to go. Life is dark and suffering, and you think it's cheerful, but no, it's headed for, the gloomiest end. It's just written into the code of life. Okay, that's a really useful message because it's quite striking, particularly when you're young. You're like, "Wow, you sure?" But then they go, "Yeah, we're sure. It's just going to end. So, get ready for it." That's much better than being told at MIT they may solve. No, they're not going to solve. They're not going to solve. We're all going to die. So let's just stop, rejoicing about health news. No, it's going to happen. To neglect health news. It's just, it's not going to be ready in time. Maybe in 500 years it'll solve, but if it's not one thing, it's going to be another. The ordinariness of death is something the news organization has a hard time accepting. Death is either something cataclysmic, the airplane blows up and it was tragic and extraordinary, or it's on its way out. What it refuses to do is to cover the stories of an ordinary octogenarian heart giving out in a Melbourne hospital. That's not news, it's just normal. But of course, it's what we need to hear. The normality of the inevitable is what we need to hear and what the news keeps us away from. Look, something else that's important in the news. This is something that really saddens serious news people in serious news organizations, and that is the fact that humanity is obsessed by celebrities, right? We live apparently in a celebrity culture, and this makes clever people really despair. And they say, what's wrong with the world? People are obsessed by celebrities. Now look, my own feeling is there's nothing wrong with celebrities, okay? Every society that's ever existed has had celebrities. You need celebrities. You need what get called role models, right? Because, whether it's ancient Athens or it's, medieval France or whatever, you need people who other people look up to and learn about their own lives by looking at their lives, etc. You need celebrities. You're not going to do away with them, okay? So the problem is not having celebrities. It's that we got the wrong ones. We've got the wrong ones. We've got people like this lady, okay? She's not the right kind of celebrity. Now, why have we got this lady? Okay, why have we got this lady? The reason is that serious people in serious news organizations go, "No, I'm sorry, I don't like celebrity news." So what they've done by dismissing celebrity news is to abandon the task of making celebrities to news organizations of the lowest common denominator. Let's remember, Kim Kardashian was not made by God. She was made by news organizations, many of them owned by Rupert Murdoch. And she was a manufactured product, okay? This lady, too, was manufactured by the news, okay? That's why we think of her as famous. The news has helped to do that. Now, what serious news organizations need to do is to get on with the task of making their own celebrities. What celebrity really is about, should be about, is to put before our eyes role models that can tell us about how to live in certain areas of life. They are sources of virtue and interest, okay? This is what the mission, the highest mission of celebrity news is really about. You get hints of it occasionally in the news. Recently, the actress Natalie Portman went to the park with her child. Now, I don't know, those who've got children, it's really boring taking your child to the park, isn't it? It's like, you really struggle, do I have to do it? And you know in your heart of hearts that it's good, and it's important to go to the park. They like it, but very, very boring. Now, it's really nice when you think that the spotlight of glamour has moved on to this business of taking your child to the park. I'm going to the park, and Natalie Portman was in the park too. So that's quite an important thing to do. It's quite nice if Saint Natalie, let's call her Saint Natalie, the patron saint of taking your child to the park, it's quite nice if she's giving us a kind of role model for what we might do in this important area. Now, these guys, the guys who came before the news, these guys always understood it. You need some saints. You need some saints because you need role models. Okay, a functioning society needs role models. And the problem with the modern news is that it's abandoned that task in its most serious outlets to the lowest common denominator. And that's why we're in trouble. So better celebrity, not no celebrity, is my suggestion. Now, look, something else that happens in the news. You know how it is on the weekend, right? You're supposed to, looking at the news is supposed to be a kind of relaxing activity. And, the people who make Saturday and Sunday newspapers and supplements, etc., they present it as a really kind of relaxing occasion. You'll sit on the sofa and you'll pick up a supplement, a colour supplement, etc. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes you read these supplements and it's a cheerful day, and by the end of the supplement, you are going mad inside. You're tossing the supplement aside, and you're in a kind of angry mood. And when your partner says, anything wrong? You go, no. And what's going on? Well, look, the problem is that you have suffered from one of the chief dangers of the news today, which is envy. Okay? Envy is one of the, sometimes they say on the news things like, turn away now, there is strobe lighting, or there is scenes of nudity, so turn away. Really what it should be telling us is, turn away, there's a moment of envy. Okay, this is going to make you seriously envious. We live in societies which basically tell us that if you work hard, you've got energy, etc., you could do anything. You could be anyone, okay? Most of us don't become anyone in particular. But the news keeps telling us, good news, there's this restaurateur, he came from nothing, he's got 32 restaurants across Australia, he's worth, $8 billion. Let's celebrate his success and let's find out about him and his wife. And why do we want to hear this stuff? This stuff destroys us. The other day I was looking at a newspaper and I came across this man. My goodness. Okay, first problem, this man is called Elon Musk. First problem is he's 46. Now, the problem with this is that I'm 44, and for a long time, when you're younger, you can tell yourself, look, it hasn't happened, but, I've got a bit of time ahead of me and it's going to work, but I'm not going to get there because this man, Elon Musk, he helped to found eBay. He was a major investor in PayPal. He's worth $18 billion. He's sending men to Mars in a few years. This is his lovely wife. He's got 5 children, and there was a supplement saying that he's invented electric cars, and also he's learned how to cook Italian food. And on a weekend, he loves to toss up something very light, some tortellini and mushrooms, and it's just like, why do I want to know this? I'm going mad inside because he's 46 and he's worth $16 billion and he cooks food like this. I'm going mad. But of course, we're not allowed to do that because there's no warning. This could make you envious. This is like an odd private worry of mine. Now look, we need to be aware of this. As consumers of the news, we are going to be made envious on a regular basis, and the news isn't going to warn us. We still live with a Judeo-Christian background that tells you envy is bad. Only bad people feel envy. Well, look, I think we need to be charitable towards envy. Envy is in many ways a signal that your life's gone a bit wrong and that you should take an effort to go in a certain direction. The problem is it's a really unclear signal. It's sort of saying something's wrong, but it's not necessarily quite giving you, what to do next. But I think we should study envy. I am actually a great fan of keeping a diary of envious attacks. Most of us, at least 5 times a day, something will make us envious. My advice to you is jot it down. And then if you've got some time on the weekend or whatever, just look through the diary and try and trace the themes through it, because there will be themes. And envious attacks point us to our better self that hasn't yet come into fruition. But it's a hint about where we might be going. So envy is a very important thing to do. But the news doesn't really help us with envy. For a start, it doesn't say this guy might make you envious and this is why. Now, actually, if you start to take a story like this apart, I'm not envious of cooking Italian food. I don't care. And this guy's wife, I'm not really envious of her. And actually, I don't want to start eBay and I don't want to send men to Mars. So what is it that I'm really envious? If I analyze my envy, and actually, as I think about it, really what I'm envious about is this guy is unbelievably brave. He's unbelievably brave. He's had one idea after another, which everybody ridicules. Electric cars, men on Mars, PayPal. Every stage, people laughed at him, and he kept going through unbelievable opposition. And that's what I like. That's what I'm envious of. But that takes quite a while. I'm summarizing, telescoping what happens. It takes quite a while to get there. So we need a bit of help with our envy, and the news doesn't give this to us. Okay, envy and the news. Moving on to something else. Now look, serious news organizations believe that what makes them serious is that they don't have much bias, okay? The word bias has a really bad name in serious journalism. So the lowest kinds of journalism, like, the Mail Online or Fox News, etc., they got lots of bias. But the really kind of quality news organizations don't have bias. They say, come to us, listen to the news from us, we don't have any bias. And this is supposed to be a good thing. So there's no more high and mighty news organization on the planet than the BBC. And the BBC all the time speak about their lack of bias. And they always will say that when they're covering an issue, they just balance out whatever it is. So if they're doing a story on, say, genital mutilation, they'll have someone who's very anti-genital mutilation, and then in the interest of balance, someone who's, found some things to say in favor of the practice. If they're, doing a piece on genocide, someone who's really anti-genocide, just for balance, someone who's, quite sees the point of a bit of genocide every now and then. So always trying to kind of balance everything up. Okay. It's ridiculous It is ridiculous, this obsession with a lack of bias. When these people are asked to justify what they're doing, they often say things like, well, we wouldn't want to unduly influence the audience. Oh, really? Why not? Right? First of all, what is the audience? A 2-year-old child that can't make up its mind on anything? It's like, surely the audience can. Just tell us what you think. You've been sitting in the newsroom, you've got the best data available. Can you please think it through and tell me what you think? Don't tell me. It's like a chef coming out of the kitchen going, well, look, I didn't want to unduly influence your dinner, so I haven't cooked it. Here are the ingredients. You cook it because, you know better than me what you like. It's like, come on, cook it, and if I like it, I'll eat it, and if not, I'll walk away. We're treated like children by these anti-bias news organizations. Of course, we need to know what to think. One of my favorite news organizations is The Economist. It is so biased. From page 1 to the last page, everything is biased, and I often don't agree with the bias, but I love that these guys have got an angle on stuff. They believe in stuff. One of the great dangers is we're drowning in facts, and we don't know what to think about them. The image of the viewer and the listener of the news is someone who kind of has a very clear sense of everything, just looking for the ingredients, and then they're going to cook them in their own mind. Most of us are like, I don't know what to think about that pipeline. Is it good? I don't know. Is it bad? I don't know. We're looking for some help. And if we don't like the help, we might move away from it, but we need it. And look, the area in which this matters most of all is economic news. Okay? Now, the major failing of news organizations worldwide in the early 21st century was missing the financial crisis. Okay? Every single news organization managed to miss this, and part of the reason why they missed it is they can't talk about economics in ways that raise the really big questions. I mean, look, take the New York Times, okay? The New York Times is, you know how they have that strap line, all the news that's fit to print, okay? All the news that's fit to print. That's about the most asinine strap line you could ever have imagined. These guys were 20 blocks from Wall Street, and in 2006, all the news that's fit to print, they managed to miss the fact that JP Morgan's balance sheet was, up the creek, the Bear Stearns was about to collapse. They couldn't notice anything, right? They didn't know, their optics were wrong. The way in which the news discusses economics is one of the great problems of our time. People often say, young people will often say things like, oh, I'm not very political, I'm not interested in politics, right? My answer to that is, you're not interested in the way that news tells you about politics, right? You're not trying very hard, but at the same time, nor is the news, okay? So the blame is shared. And the great problem with the way in which economics is reported in the news is that all of us have got really big questions when it comes to economics. What kind of a society are we living in? Who gets what? Why is the money shared this way? What are corporations about? What's the meaning of work? All these kind of questions, they never crop up in the news. When it says business news, economic news, right? It's all about, well, the inflation rate edged up 0.5%. And what about the meaning of life and the great questions of economics? They don't appear. Weirdly, news organizations always like to tell you things, or the big bosses of news organizations always like to tell you things like, well, in the modern world, we've got Twitter, and so everyone can do everything, and there's so many plural voices. Oh yeah? Really? If you look at Twitter, it's all merely a reflection of what the big guys are doing, right? Where's this famed public opinion where everyone can have every say? Did they spot the financial crisis? Did Twitter spot the financial? No, they don't. You don't spot it. It's still the big guys who are controlling the narrative, and the narrative doesn't allow for the big questions of economics. And that's why, when there's a big problem, okay, you either get confusion and sort of depression and melancholy, and then occasionally you get an outburst of fury, okay? This is the Occupy movement, and it's like, I can't bear it. I just need to do something. So this guy scrawls a thing, let's get out of this shit, let's figure this shit out together. I'm going to go and stand at a placard, I'm really wired up, etc. And I can't bear it, okay? The news is responsible for this man, okay? This man is a product of the news, and I'll tell you two things about it. A, he's incensed. He's appalled. He wants to make a change, and B, he's got no clue. He doesn't know what to do. He has no clue. That was the problem of the Occupy movement. They had no ideas. Now, there are fantastic ideas out there, but weirdly, or suspiciously, or something, they never make it into the news. And sometimes at this point, people say to me, are you a Marxist? Are you advocating the ideas of Karl Marx? No, of course not. There are hundreds of ideas out there about how we might live economically and arrange the economic system. But weirdly, despite all those stories on Miley Cyrus and all the time that can be told to us about Kim Kardashian, etc., there's no time for that other stuff, weirdly. And if anyone is talking about those topics, well, I'm sorry, he doesn't quite fit, she doesn't really work on TV, etc. So oddly, those stories just never appear. So this rage is a product of this kind of strangely cool view of, well, let's not say how we should live, let's not unduly influence the population, let's not tell them what's right and wrong, let them make up their own minds. Oh yeah? Well, that's quite hard to do, to make up your own minds, especially when you haven't really got the data and the concepts, and etc. So this guy is a symptom, in a way, of the news. Look, part of the problem of the news, another kind of related problem, is that If you open up the hearts of most journalists and look at what they really believe in, inscribed on their hearts is the word Watergate. Okay? They operate with a Watergate paradigm. Now, what was Watergate? Okay, Watergate was something's wrong somewhere in society, okay, at the top, with some politicians who are horrible and nasty, and along comes the journalist, who's kind of like James Bond, and so James Bond journalist goes out and finds the truth, and so busts open the gates, and so eavesdrop and thing, and then society changes, and the politician gets put in jail, and then society improves. And journalists are obsessed. Every young journalist still today wants to be, Bob Woodward, wants to be part of the, wants to uncover the next Watergate. Okay, that is still what people think. Now, the really bad news for these guys is that the bad stuff in society is not actually susceptible generally to a Watergate-type analysis. There are actually not that many guys in rooms plotting and all the rest of it, and you can't send James Bond in. And actually, most of the stuff that's wrong with this world is not a secret. It's out there. The facts are there, okay? What's lacking is analysis and the passionate telling of that story of what's wrong. But it's not a secret. The news is obsessed by identifying a few bad guys. It's like, there's something wrong in the world. What is it? Oh, it's him. Oh, it's him. Okay, so let's go and get him. Let's put handcuffs on him and take him to prison. Oh, great. He did things with prostitutes. He's a bit fat. He's ugly. Good. The world will get better. And it's like, look, guys, that's not the real problem of the world. You have spotted, it's a very nice story, but it's not addressing what news needs to really do, which is to systematically address the needs of the nation and what's really wrong with the nation. So the news too often settles for a very kind of easy, pat narrative around the bad stuff in society. Look, drawing things to a close now. The news is based on the idea that you need to keep checking the news because the most important thing that's ever happened has happened in the last half hour since the last bulletin. So that's why you need to go and check it, right? Because something may have changed in the world of news, and you need to find out because it's new and therefore it will be important. The truth is, as we know, that some of the most important things that ever happened in humanity happened about 3,000 years ago. Okay? But this stuff never makes it into the news. The Buddha said some interesting things about compassion, the news. Philosopher Plato wrote a fascinating book that will tell you more about what's happening in Canberra than anything live from the guy who's standing with a microphone with a satellite dish behind him. Okay, get rid of that guy and let's talk about Plato. But we don't, because we've got this narrative that it's all what's happened in the last 5 minutes. So that way we lose a massive capacity for insight. The news, by claiming that the new is always the important, robs us of an unbelievable richness of concepts, ideas, etc. So we really need to be careful. It's very hard. It's become very hard to think for yourself. Okay, part of the problem is the prestige of news. News is so prestigious. If you say, I'm going to go off and read the news. Please leave me alone. I'm just reading the newspaper. People go, oh wow, reading the newspaper. It must be left alone. If you go, someone says, well, what are you doing? And you go, well, actually, I'm just kind of looking out the window and sort of thinking about stuff that happened to me when I was 12 and thinking about something. People go, come on, go and do the washing up. Stop lazing about, right? There's not much sympathy for thinking. There's a lot of sympathy for the dignity of watching the news. But, a lot of it is nonsense. It calls itself the news, but it's only ever some news. It's some news. It's not the news. It's some news masquerading as the whole story. It's some news that some guys put together in an office. They were drinking coffee out of styrofoam cups. They were trying to work out what was what, and they decided to shovel these few stories and make up this thing called reality. Well, look, reality is a multifaceted, gloriously complex thing which no news organization is ever going to pin down. But boy, oh boy, does it try and tell us that it has. That's the claim. This is one of the few areas where we can still think. Until they put Wi-Fi reliably on aeroplanes, thinking for yourself is really hard because, when you're thinking about the news from inside, all of us have got news from inside, but it's hard to get to because it's bound up with anxiety and sadness and regret and challenge, etc. So it's always good to say, I'm just going to follow the news instead. But, sometimes on an airplane we can think about that sort of quieter news. We can hear about the voice from within. That's such an important voice. Many of you and me and people, modern citizens nowadays, we can't sleep at night. Can you sleep at night? Everyone's got insomnia, it seems. There's an epidemic of insomnia. Now, what is insomnia? Insomnia is basically all those thoughts that you didn't have in the day, coming up for air, coming up for revenge, waking you up at 4 a.m. and demanding to be heard. And the reason why you didn't hear them in the day was because of the news, in part because of the news. There's chatter, the noise, the synthetic sounds all around. That's drowning it out. So look, the final sort of takeaway message is really, there's a lot of stuff happening out there which never makes it into the news. We can't mortgage our intelligence and our critical faculties to the news, though that is, even benevolently so, what the news wants us to do. We miss so much. We miss stuff from within. We miss stuff from our own societies. We miss guys like this. He never makes it into the news, right? There are quiet things going on. There are subtle things going on. The news can't see. It can't see an awful lot of reality. And we need to keep our wits about us in contact with this message. Now, look, one final thing. I'm a philosopher by training, and philosophers are a very serious, sometimes self-important bunch that really think they know the truth about all sorts of things. And they analyze life, and they come to big conclusions. But then a philosopher friend of mine told me a little while back that the average work of philosophy sells 300 copies. Okay, that's nothing. The average work of philosophy. No one's interested in philosophers. They are totally useless, marginal bunch. Okay, no one's listening to them. So I remember listening to this fact: 300 people read the average book of philosophy. And then one insomniac night, I was thinking about this, and I thought about the Mail Online, which is the English language's most popular news source. 40 million souls, 40 million people go and visit that website every day. So on the one hand, you've got 300 people reading the philosophy book. On the other hand, you've got the 40 million a day who are checking out the news website. What's going on? What can we do about that? Well, look, one thought I had was, what about if you took the Daily Mail, the Mail Online, and you simply rewrote it using philosophers? You invited philosophers to rewrite all those stories that are always appearing in the Mail, like about murder and incest and Taylor Swift and all of that. You got these philosophers to rewrite the Mail Online with paying attention to all the things that philosophers are interested in, like subtlety and complexity and justice and humanity and all the rest of it. What would you get? Anyway, we tinkered around with this, and then a few months ago we launched our answer to this, which is called the Philosopher's Mail. And it really exists. You can look at it, and it's at www.philosophersmail.com. And we scour the world for interesting stories, and this is what we do. And it's an attempt to fight back against the news monolith. And I think, my book is in a way the theory of the news, and it's a kind of distillation of my deepest thoughts. This is an attempt at some practice, but really what I'm inviting everyone to do is take conscious command of your life around the news. We're taught and encouraged to be very, very passive. We don't need to be. We're still inventing the sort of news that we need in order to be healthy and good citizens. We haven't got there yet. I'm very optimistic that we can be. We can make the news better, and my book is a little contribution to that journey towards a better sort of news. Thank you very much.